Most people believe their brain is who they are. They think that every thought that flashes across their mind is truth. Every fear, every craving, every impulse is a command that must be obeyed. This is why most lives are spent in a state of reaction, trapped by habits they did not consciously choose. They blame circumstances, other people, or even luck, but the truth is far simpler and far harsher. The mind is a tool, and most people do not know how to use it. Your brain is not your master. It never was. It cannot tell you who you are, what you should do, or how you should feel. It only follows patterns, old programs, and repeated conditioning. It seeks the familiar. Even when the familiar causes suffering, it creates drama because drama has been rewarded in the past. It creates fear because fear has protected you before. It creates distraction because distraction has given temporary relief. And because you have never trained it, it runs on autopilot, controlling your emotions, your decisions, your relationships, your health, and even the trajectory of your life without your conscious input. But here is the shift. Most people never see the brain as a training ground. It is not the final authority. It is not the ruler of your destiny. It is clay, malleable, programmable. Every thought you allow, every reaction you repeat, every habit you reinforce shapes it. Every moment you pause instead of reacting, every moment you choose mastery instead of impulse rewires it. This is not philosophy. This is neuroscience. The neurons in your brain form pathways in response to repeated patterns. The old patterns that enslave you today are the same pathways you built yesterday, last week, last year. And the new patterns that create strength, calm, focus, and clarity are built the exact same way with repetition, discipline, and conscious effort. Most people have never truly trained their minds. They complain about stress, but stress is not the enemy. It is the signal of a brain that is untrained and reactive. They complain about fear, but fear is not the enemy. It is a messenger showing where the brain has been left unchecked. They complain about anxiety, distraction, or lack of control, but these are not curses. They are the product of an untended training ground. You do not need a new life or external miracles. You need to train your mind. You need to take responsibility for the one instrument that controls everything you are, think, feel, and do. Training the mind begins with awareness. Most people live in automatic mode. The brain runs the show without permission. You wake up and the mind is already narrating. You are not enough. You are behind. You are missing something. You need validation. You need approval. You need more. And you believe it. You follow it. You obey it. Every day, this autopilot mode reinforces old programs, and you go to bed wondering why your life feels chaotic, unfulfilled, or stuck. Awareness is the first act of rebellion against the brain's domination. It is the first declaration that you are no longer a passive passenger in your own life. Once you become aware, you must pause. Pause is the fundamental training exercise of the mind. In the pause, you create space between stimulus and response. That space is where power lives. In that space, you are no longer reacting to the old program. You are choosing. You observe the thought, the craving, the fear, the impulse, and you do not obey it automatically. Instead, you question it, you redirect it, you rewire it. The pause is a moment of authority. It is the first step in transforming the brain from a tyrant into a servant. Breath is the next instrument of training. The body and mind are deeply connected, and breath is the control center. Slow, controlled, conscious breathing sends a signal to the nervous system that you are in charge. It interrupts chaos. It interrupts fear. It interrupts the compulsive loops that your untrained brain is addicted to. When you breathe, you are no longer a puppet of thought. You are the one who decides the rhythm of the mind. You are the one who sets the tone for the day, for the response, for the life you want to live. Repetition is the third principle. The brain is a muscle. Strength comes from training, not inspiration. One pause, one breath, one choice does not change a life. But repeated daily, consistently, deliberately, these actions build new pathways. Old habits weaken. New habits strengthen. Impulses lose their power. Thoughts no longer dominate without permission. Slowly, the brain learns a new language, a language of discipline, focus, clarity, calm, and mastery. This is how champions are created, not by desire alone, not by emotion alone, not by talent alone, but by repeated, conscious training of the mind, moment by moment, day by day. The training ground approach also teaches patience. The brain does not change overnight. Neural pathways are rewired gradually. Each time you resist distraction, each time you refuse to give energy to negativity, Each time you act with authority instead of reaction, you strengthen the new program. You begin to notice subtle shifts in thought patterns, in clarity, in calm, in the ability to choose actions aligned with your highest self. Every day of practice compounds. The brain begins to obey your command rather than running wild on old autopilot loops. People mistake emotions for authority. They think feeling motivated, inspired, or confident makes them strong. But motivation is fleeting. Confidence is fragile. Both rise and fall with circumstances, other people, or internal chemistry. Authority is different. Authority is discipline. Authority is the product of training your brain to obey only what you consciously allow it to obey. Authority is the realization that the mind is a servant, not a master, and that you are the one who directs it, who builds it, who shapes it. The difference between those who live a reactive life and those who live a life of power is not luck. It is not privilege. It is not circumstance. It is the recognition that the brain is a training ground, not a master. The reactive person lets the mind control them. The powerful person trains the mind to obey them. The reactive person chases every thought and feeling like it is truth. The powerful person chooses which thoughts to feed, which impulses to act on, and which old patterns to break. The reactive person is a prisoner of autopilot. The powerful person is a warrior in command of their inner world. Most people think that power comes from action. They believe that speed, reaction, doing more, and pushing harder is the key to control over life, over relationships, over work, over themselves. And yet, the most profound power is invisible. The most decisive influence is silent. The most effective mastery happens in the moments when nothing seems to be happening at all. This is the core of the Shaolin trick, and it is deceptively simple. Pause, breathe, and command attention. Pause. That is the first step, and it is the hardest. In a world addicted to immediacy, we have lost the art of the pause. Someone says something that hurts, and we respond instantly. Someone triggers us, and we react without thought. A craving rises, and we chase it immediately. We believe that reacting proves strength, that acting quickly proves power, that giving in proves survival. But the truth is the opposite. Reaction is the language of slavery. Reaction is the voice of the untrained mind. Reaction is the mind dictating to you rather than you dictating to the mind. The pause is the first break in that chain. In the pause, you create a space between stimulus and response. That space is invisible, yet it is more powerful than any action you can take. In that space, you are no longer the mind's puppet. In that space, you can see the patterns of your own thoughts. You can observe the rise of emotion before it forces you into action. You can watch desire, anger, fear, or attachment surface, and instead of obeying automatically, you stand apart. You are the observer, you are the chooser, you are the authority. The pause is the moment when freedom is born, because in that pause, reaction no longer controls you. Breathe. This is the second step, and it is just as essential. The breath is not just air moving in and out of your body, it is the remote control of your nervous system. It is the bridge between mind and body, between thought and action, between chaos and calm. When you breathe consciously, deeply, and slowly, you interrupt the reflexive patterns that keep you trapped in stress, anxiety, or compulsion. You signal to your body that it does not need to panic, that it does not need to fight, that it does not need to run. The breath quiets the noise inside. It sharpens the focus outside. It turns the mind from a wild horse galloping uncontrollably into a disciplined soldier awaiting orders. When combined, pause and breath create clarity. You see your thoughts for what they are, temporary, passing, not commands. You feel emotions for what they are, messengers, not rulers. You recognize impulses for what they are, signals, not instructions. But clarity alone is not enough. Observing, understanding, and calming the mind is the preparation. The final step, the step that turns inner discipline into outward power, is to command attention. Commanding attention is not about shouting louder, moving faster, or forcing people to listen. That is coercion. That is not the Shaolin way. Commanding attention is about being present, being deliberate, and making your inner authority undeniable. When you pause and breathe, you stabilize your mind and body. When you command attention, you direct your focus deliberately to the task, the person, the moment before you. You do not scatter energy. You do not diffuse yourself across distraction. You do not give power to chaos. You bring all of your mental energy, all of your awareness, all of your presence into a single point. And that is magnetic. That is compelling. That is influence without effort. The Shaolin trick works because it addresses the deepest weakness of the untrained mind: distraction. Most people's attention is fragmented. They react to notifications, gossip, emotions, and urges. They chase pleasure. They avoid discomfort. They follow impulses. They allow external circumstances to direct the inner landscape. But attention is the currency of mastery. Wherever your focus goes, your energy flows. Wherever your attention flows, your life forms. By pausing, you stop the runaway mind. By breathing, you calm the nervous system that fuels reaction. By commanding attention, you redirect the energy, and you become the master of your own mental currency. This trick is deceptively simple because simplicity is its genius. The mind resists complex solutions. It craves shortcuts, hacks, excitement drama. But mastery is rarely flashy. Mastery is repetition. Mastery is discipline. Mastery is doing the small, silent, unseen acts every day that sculpt the mind into an instrument of authority. Pause. Breathe. Command attention. One pause when triggered. One breath when anxious. One deliberate act of focus when the mind wanders. Over time, these small actions accumulate. Old patterns weaken. New patterns strengthen. The autopilot mode is replaced with conscious navigation. The beauty of the Shaolin trick is that it works everywhere. In relationships, when someone provokes you, the pause keeps you from saying what will later be regretted. The breath keeps you grounded when emotions flare. Commanding attention allows you to respond with presence, not reaction, with wisdom, not instinct. At work, when chaos surrounds you, the pause and breath stabilize you. Commanding attention allows you to see the real problem, the necessary solution, and the actions that matter. In life, when impulses tempt you toward indulgence or distraction, pausing interrupts the pattern, breathing restores calm, and focused attention redirects energy to what is meaningful. It is not easy at first. The mind will resist. It will scream for immediate action. It will remind you of old habits, old cravings, old fears. It will tell you that waiting is weakness, that calm is boredom, that discipline is sacrifice. That is precisely the moment to practice the trick. Resistance is the teacher. Discomfort is the signal that the brain is being rewired. Every time you pause against instinct, breathe against tension, and command attention instead of scattering it, you are strengthening neural pathways that produce strength, focus, and clarity. The Shaolin trick does more than improve focus or reduce stress. It transforms identity. It trains the mind to see itself as the commander rather than the commanded. It teaches the brain that impulses, distractions, and old programs do not control you. It shows that calm is more powerful than chaos, patience is stronger than haste, and presence is more magnetic than effort. It turns thought into ally rather than adversary. It converts reaction into choice. It converts fear into clarity. And over time, the practice turns the invisible discipline of attention into the visible authority of action. Most people live their entire lives on autopilot. They wake up, and before they even take a breath, the mind is already running. It tells them what to worry about, what to crave, what to fear, and what to avoid. Every stimulus triggers a response. Every insult triggers anger, every disappointment triggers despair, every slight triggers revenge, and every craving triggers chase. This is reaction. This is the old program. It is built into most people's lives because they never took the time to question it, never paused to observe it, never trained the mind to respond differently. Reaction is automatic, impulsive, and unrefined. It is the default setting of the human brain that has never been disciplined. Reaction is easy to understand because it feels natural. When someone criticizes you, the first impulse is to defend, to explain, to argue, to prove yourself. When someone ignores you, the instinct is to chase, to text, to call, to demonstrate worth. When fear rises, the instinct is to run or hide. When desire rises, the instinct is to pursue or consume. Reaction feels unavoidable because the mind is wired to respond, to survive, to repeat patterns that have been reinforced over time. Most people confuse this automatic response with life itself, with who they are, with identity. They think, this is me, I feel this, I act like this. This is how I respond to life. But the truth is far deeper. What they call themselves is nothing more than a chain of untrained habits running on old programs. The old program has one purpose: preservation, survival, and repetition. It is efficient, but it is blind. It reacts before it observes. It acts before it understands. It repeats old stories, old fears, old weaknesses. It is strong because it is automatic, but weak because it is unchosen. Living under reaction is like being a prisoner in your own mind. You are constantly at the mercy of impulses, emotions, and triggers. Your identity, your power, your focus, your decisions are not yours. They are dictated by neural loops that have never been interrupted. This is why most people feel stuck. They are not stuck because life is unfair. They are stuck because the old program is running unchecked, creating chaos, stress, and regret. Discipline is the new program. Discipline is the conscious rewrite. Discipline is the deliberate choice to interrupt reaction and replace it with intention. Discipline is the moment when the mind no longer dictates, but the self commands. Where reaction is impulsive, discipline is thoughtful. Where reaction is chaotic, discipline is structured. Where reaction is weak, discipline is strong. Discipline does not rely on motivation, desire, or emotion. Motivation fades, desire changes, emotions fluctuate. Discipline persists because it is a program chosen and reinforced consciously. It becomes the operating system of a life aligned with clarity, purpose, and inner authority. Discipline begins with awareness. The first step is noticing the impulse, the urge, the reaction before it manifests. The moment someone says something triggering, the mind wants to explode, defend, or retaliate. Discipline notices the impulse and does not obey it automatically. It observes, it understands, it pauses. It chooses. This pause, this observation is the doorway between reaction and response, between the old program and the new. Most people never stop to observe. They are carried by the momentum of automatic response. But discipline insists on presence. Discipline insists on watching the mind rather than being ruled by it. Breath is another key tool of discipline. The mind and body are inseparable, and the body state fuels mental patterns. When the body tenses, the mind reacts. When the body panics, the mind follows. Discipline uses the breath as the anchor. Slow, deliberate, controlled breathing interrupts impulsive patterns. It signals the nervous system that chaos is unnecessary, that reaction is optional, that clarity is possible. Each conscious breath strengthens the mind's capacity to pause, to observe, and to act deliberately. It transforms the reflexive reaction into intentional response. Repetition is essential. Discipline is not a single heroic act, it is a daily practice, a series of small, deliberate choices repeated over time. Every time you resist the urge to respond angrily, every time you stay calm instead of panicking, every time you focus on what matters instead of chasing distraction, you are installing the new program. The brain is a machine that adapts to patterns. Repeat old habits and they become automatic. Repeat new habits and they replace the old. The difference between reaction and discipline is simply the repeated choice to act with authority rather than instinct. The new program also reshapes identity. When you consistently choose discipline over reaction, you do not just change behavior, you change who you believe yourself to be. You no longer identify as someone who explodes under insult, who chases validation, who succumbs to every urge. You identify as someone who observes, controls, and directs. You identify as someone capable of patience, strength, and clarity. This is not about perfection. It is about alignment. It is about consciously building the mind to serve the self, rather than the self being enslaved to the mind. Discipline is also the antidote to emotional slavery. Most people live as captives of their feelings. A slight provocation leads to anger. A small disappointment leads to despair. A fleeting desire leads to indulgence. Discipline teaches the mind to respond to emotions without being consumed by them. Anger is no longer explosive. Fear is no longer immobilizing. Desire is no longer compulsive. Instead, emotions become signals, not masters. They inform, guide, and pass, but they do not control. Reaction is loud, impulsive, and exhausting. Discipline is silent, deliberate, and sustaining. Reaction burns energy without building strength. Discipline uses energy to create lasting power. Reaction binds you to old stories, old fears, and old habits. Discipline liberates you to create new patterns, new beliefs, and new pathways for success. The more discipline is practiced, the more the old program loses influence. The brain rewires itself to respond to life with clarity, strength, and presence. Those who continue to live in reaction wonder why life feels chaotic, why emotions are overwhelming, why choices seem impossible. Those who embrace discipline notice subtle shifts. At first, moments of calm where there was panic, moments of focus where there was distraction, moments of clarity where there was confusion. Over time, these moments accumulate and the mind itself becomes a disciplined instrument, aligned with purpose, capable of choosing rather than obeying, capable of creating rather than reacting, capable of commanding rather than being commanded. Most people live their lives in constant motion, not just physically but mentally. Thoughts race, emotions surge, distractions multiply, and the mind rarely stops. They confuse movement with progress. They confuse busyness with purpose. They believe that doing more, thinking faster, reacting quicker, and controlling every situation is the path to mastery. But the truth is very different. Real insight, real power, and real control over your life do not come from speed, activity, or noise. They come from stillness. Stillness exposes the truth of your mind. Stillness is not simply the absence of activity. It is the deliberate act of turning inward, of observing, of disengaging from the endless external pulls and returning to the center of your awareness. When the body slows, the mind is forced to slow. When the mind slows, the layers of illusion begin to peel away. When the mind is quiet, thoughts no longer have the ability to dominate you. In stillness, the hidden patterns of your thinking, the unconscious habits, the buried fears, the unacknowledged desires, and the automatic reactions are revealed. The chaos that you usually ignore suddenly becomes visible. Most people never sit still because stillness is uncomfortable. It forces confrontation with oneself. It forces awareness of emotions that are usually drowned out by distraction. It forces acknowledgement of habits that are usually hidden behind busyness. When you are silent, you cannot run from yourself. When you are motionless, you cannot escape your thoughts. When the world quiets, the mind speaks loudly, and the truth of your inner state becomes unavoidable. People resist stillness because they are addicted to the noise of social media, of gossip, of work, of stimulation, of their own restless thinking. But that noise is a veil. Stillness removes the veil and exposes what is really there. In stillness, the mind's illusions are revealed. You see how often you chase validation, approval, and recognition. You see how often fear dictates your decisions. You see how attachment to past pain, past failure, and identity holds you hostage. You see how reactive you are to every external circumstance, how easily your mood shifts with what others say or do. All the self-deceptions, all the rationalizations, all the justifications for why you are stuck or weak are brought into sharp clarity in the quiet moments. Stillness does not lie. It exposes the mind exactly as it is, without judgment, without interference, without distraction. Stillness also reveals your patterns of thought. Most people live their lives unconsciously, repeating the same narratives, rehearsing the same fears, reliving the same regrets, and chasing the same illusions of happiness. The mind loops endlessly like a river circling a rock, never progressing, never free. But in stillness, the loops become visible. You can see which thoughts dominate your energy, which emotions enslave you, which impulses control your behavior. You can observe yourself without acting, without reacting, without justifying. And that observation is the first step toward freedom, because the moment you see the pattern clearly, you can begin to interrupt it. Stillness strengthens clarity. When the mind is noisy, decisions are reactive, emotional, and scattered. When the mind is still, decisions are deliberate, conscious, and aligned with your true priorities. You begin to distinguish between what is urgent and what is important, between what is necessary and what is distraction, between what is truth and what is illusion. Stillness allows you to see the world and yourself without the distortions created by unexamined emotions and untrained thoughts. It shows where you are strong, where you are weak, and where you are blind. It removes the fog that habitually clouds perception. Stillness also exposes fear. Most people avoid stillness because fear arises when the mind is silent. The fear of being alone with your thoughts, the fear of facing discomfort, the fear of confronting memories, regrets, or unresolved emotions. Fear is not an external force, it is an internal mirror. In stillness, you see fear clearly, not as a story or justification, but as a raw signal. You see how often fear controls your decisions, dictates your behavior, and limits your potential. And when fear is seen in the light of stillness, it begins to lose its power because observation is always stronger than reaction. Desire is also revealed. The mind constantly chases pleasure, craving experiences, attention, recognition, and validation. In the noise of life, these cravings feel essential and urgent. But in stillness, they are exposed as impulses, not commands. They are patterns, not truths. They are distractions, not necessities. You see what the mind really wants beyond the illusions of satisfaction or comfort, and you begin to recognize that mastery comes from choosing consciously rather than obeying instinctively. Stillness exposes attachment. Most people are attached to identity, history, relationships, and outcomes. They act, react, and suffer because of what they cling to. In the quiet moments, you see the threads of attachment in your thoughts and feelings. You notice how past identities shape your present behavior, how unprocessed pain influences your choices, how the desire for approval or fear of loss controls your life. And with recognition comes the possibility of release. The beauty of stillness is that it is accessible at any moment. It requires no special place, no ritual, no permission. It only requires the courage to pause, to stop reacting, to stop seeking distraction, and to observe. The first moments are often uncomfortable because the mind resists. It protests, it wanders, it magnifies every fear, desire, and story. But persistence in stillness trains the mind to calm, to observe, to discern, and to grow. Through stillness, the mind becomes transparent. The illusions fall away. The autopilot fades. Reaction loses its grip. Impulse weakens. Habits that once ran unchecked become visible, identifiable, and interruptible. Thought patterns that controlled decisions for years suddenly lose their power under the clarity of observation. Emotional triggers that dictated responses become signals to guide conscious choice rather than commands to obey. Stillness is not passivity. It is not surrender. It is the ground of power. In stillness, you see the truth of your mind, and truth is the only foundation on which strength, clarity, and mastery can be built. Without stillness, life is lived blindly, dominated by old programs, reactive patterns, and unseen chains of thought and emotion. With stillness, everything becomes visible, everything becomes conscious, and everything becomes manageable. Most people misunderstand identity. They think identity is fixed, a story written once and never changed. They believe who they are is a product of the past, their upbringing, their experiences, their mistakes, or even the way others see them. They confuse memory with reality, past patterns with present truth, and old habits with who they are capable of becoming. But identity is not fixed. Identity is not inherited. Identity is not a label. Identity is created, and the primary tool for creating it is repetition. Repetition is the hidden force behind every transformation. It is the invisible sculptor that carves who you are from the raw material of thought, behavior, and habit. The mind and body are designed to adapt. Every action you repeat, every choice you reinforce, every thought you focus on is laying down a neural pathway. That pathway strengthens with every repetition until it becomes automatic, until it becomes identity. The things you do unconsciously define you far more than the things you consciously declare. That is why repetition is not trivial. It is the architect of the self. Most people do not understand this, which is why their identities remain fractured. They say, I want to be disciplined, but they skip the daily acts that build discipline. They say, I want confidence, but they avoid the situations that require them to act despite fear. They say, I want calm, but they allow their mind to be hijacked by every trigger. Identity cannot be wished into existence. It cannot be declared through statements or affirmations alone. It must be built moment by moment through repeated action. Every day, the repeated choices become the muscle memory of who you are. Repetition is how the unconscious is trained. Most people live as captives of old patterns because they reinforce them every day, often without noticing. When someone reacts with anger to a small insult, they strengthen the identity of someone who is reactive. When someone chases approval or validation, they reinforce the identity of someone dependent on external approval. When someone avoids discomfort, they reinforce the identity of someone weak. Identity is the sum of what the mind and body have repeatedly practiced. And because the mind is malleable, you can undo, redirect, and rebuild it, but only through repetition. The first step in rebuilding identity through repetition is awareness. You must observe the patterns that no longer serve you. You must identify the behaviors, thoughts, and emotional reactions that reinforce a version of yourself you do not wish to be. This requires brutal honesty. Most people avoid this step because seeing their own flaws and limitations is uncomfortable. But without recognition, repetition will continue to build the same identity, and you will remain trapped in the old self. Awareness is the first brushstroke in the conscious painting of who you want to become. The second step is deliberate action. Repetition is meaningless if it is accidental. Every act, every choice, every habit must be chosen with intention. Want to be disciplined? Repeat acts of discipline, even when you feel lazy or distracted. Want to be confident? Repeat actions that require courage, even when fear tempts you to retreat. Want to be calm? Repeat moments of stillness, pause, and breath, even when the mind screams for chaos. Identity is not built in grand gestures or moments of inspiration. It is built in consistent, deliberate action over and over again. The third step is consistency. Identity is a daily practice. A single act of courage does not make you courageous. A single day of discipline does not make you disciplined. Neural pathways are strengthened through repetition. Habit becomes automatic only after repeated performance. The mind and body remember patterns, not promises. The person who rebuilds identity does not rely on willpower alone. They rely on systems of repeated action that become automatic, turning intentional behavior into effortless expression of self. Repetition also shapes emotional resilience. Who you are is not only defined by what you do, but by how you respond to internal and external forces. If you repeatedly confront fear, you become fearless. If you repeatedly resist the urge to react emotionally, you become calm. If you repeatedly step into discomfort rather than avoiding it, you build strength. Each repeated response rewires the brain, reshaping emotional identity. Over time, the mind no longer defaults to weakness, panic, or attachment. The default becomes strength, clarity, and authority. Repetition rewires not just habits but beliefs. Every repeated action reinforces the underlying story you tell yourself about who you are. When you repeatedly act as a person of integrity, you stop questioning your morality. When you repeatedly act as a person of focus, you stop doubting your abilities. When you repeatedly act as a person who values themselves, you stop seeking validation from others. Belief follows action. Identity follows repetition. Every repeated choice, no matter how small, is a vote for the version of yourself you wish to inhabit. The power of repetition lies in its invisibility at first. Change rarely feels immediate. Early on, repeated actions may feel mechanical or meaningless. The mind may resist, claiming, "This is pointless, this is boring, this won't work." But the brain is quietly adapting. Neural pathways are being strengthened, old patterns weaken, and a new self is being formed under the surface. Over time, these small, repeated actions compound until the new identity emerges not as a decision or statement, but as a natural, effortless expression of who you are. Repetition is also the antidote to doubt and inconsistency. Most people struggle because they rely on fleeting motivation, emotion, or inspiration to define themselves. But identity cannot be built on feeling, it must be built on action. Repetition removes dependence on emotion. It removes reliance on inspiration. It replaces weakness with habit, confusion with clarity, chaos with structure. Through repetition, the self becomes disciplined, confident, calm, and strong, not because the person feels strong in every moment, but because strength has been repeated until it is the default setting of the mind and body. Every repetition is a brick. Every deliberate act of mastery is mortar. Every day of conscious, repeated behavior builds the house of your identity. Without repetition, the mind returns to old defaults. With repetition, the mind is trained to serve the self rather than enslave it. Every thought controlled, every action chosen, every habit reinforced is a step toward the person you are becoming, a person whose identity is no longer dictated by circumstance, by past patterns, or by external opinion, but by the conscious, repeated choices made over time. Most people spend their lives seeking authority outside themselves. They look for it in positions, titles, and recognition. They look for it in relationships, in approval, and in validation. They seek it in material success, accolades, and external control. They believe that power comes from the world bending to their will, from others obeying, from circumstances aligning in their favor. And yet, despite all this chasing, despite all the striving, most people remain powerless. Because true authority does not come from the outside. The goal is not control over others. The goal is inner authority. Inner authority is the quiet mastery of self. It is the calm confidence that does not need to prove itself. It is the unwavering presence that does not seek validation. It is the ability to act decisively, with clarity, without being swayed by fear, desire, or chaos. Inner authority is the recognition that the mind, the body, and the emotions are tools to be directed, not tyrants to obey. It is the understanding that power begins within, and only when it is cultivated internally can it extend outward effectively. Most people confuse control with authority. They think that ordering others, manipulating outcomes, or forcing compliance is power. That is illusion. That is reactive behavior masquerading as strength. Real authority is invisible but undeniable. It does not raise its voice to command attention. It does not demand obedience. It exists in the alignment of thought, action, and presence. People naturally respond to inner authority because it radiates stability, clarity, and decisiveness. They sense it instinctively, and it compels respect without effort. Inner authority begins with self-mastery. The first step is mastering your mind. Most minds are untrained and reactive. Thoughts race uncontrollably. Emotions surge unpredictably. Impulses dominate decisions. People believe they are acting freely, but they are enslaved to patterns they have never examined. Inner authority is built when the mind is disciplined, when impulses are observed rather than obeyed, when thoughts are filtered through the lens of conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. A mind that is trained, calm, and present cannot be shaken by external chaos. That is power, that is authority. The second component of inner authority is emotional mastery. Most people are prisoners of their feelings. Anger erupts without warning. Fear paralyzes action. Desire leads to impulsive choices. Attachment drives dependency. These are all symptoms of inner weakness masquerading as life experience. Inner authority does not eliminate emotion, it integrates it. It observes emotion, understands it, and channels it toward conscious action. Anger becomes fuel for decisive action, not destruction. Fear becomes information, not limitation. Desire becomes strategy, not compulsion. Attachment becomes awareness, not slavery. Mastering the emotional self is a cornerstone of inner authority. Discipline is another key pillar. Without discipline, inner authority cannot exist. Discipline is the repeated, conscious practice of aligning thought, action, and emotion with your chosen path. It is the refusal to chase every craving, to react to every trigger, to obey every impulse. It is the daily cultivation of habits, the repeated choices that reinforce strength, calm, and clarity. The mind obeys what it is trained to obey. When discipline is consistently applied, it rewires the brain. It shifts identity. It builds a self that is unwavering, focused, and powerful. Repetition strengthens authority because authority is not a state, it is a practice. Stillness is also essential to inner authority. Most people fill their days with noise, distraction, and action without awareness. They are constantly doing, rarely observing. They are busy but not powerful. They are moving but not growing. Stillness allows the mind to observe itself. It reveals patterns, weaknesses, and illusions. It exposes the triggers that hijack attention, the habits that weaken the self, and the thoughts that obscure clarity. In stillness, the mind becomes transparent. Observation replaces reaction. Awareness replaces chaos. Inner authority is born in the quiet moments when the mind is still enough to see itself clearly. Focus is a further extension of inner authority. The ability to direct attention deliberately, to act without distraction, to prioritize what matters, is a sign of power that cannot be purchased or faked. Most people scatter their energy, following every impulse, every notification, every external demand. Inner authority consolidates energy. It focuses like a laser on the essential. It ignores the trivial. It sees the path clearly and walks it with unwavering commitment. Attention becomes a tool of control, both internally and externally, because where focus goes, power follows. Confidence emerges naturally from inner authority. But confidence is not the goal, it is a byproduct. Confidence derived from validation, achievement, or comparison is fragile. Confidence born of inner authority is unshakable because it rests on mastery, clarity, and alignment. When you know yourself, your patterns, your impulses, and your emotions, and you have trained them to obey your conscious will, confidence arises as a natural state. It does not need to prove itself. It does not need to justify itself. It exists quietly, undeniably, and it compels respect. The highest expression of inner authority is freedom. Freedom from the compulsive pull of external circumstance, freedom from the judgment of others, freedom from the tyranny of thought and emotion. Most people live in reaction, controlled by what they see, hear, and feel. Inner authority liberates you from that slavery. You act with intention. You respond rather than react. You choose rather than obey. You create rather than wait. And in that freedom, life is no longer a series of pressures and demands. It becomes a field in which mastery, purpose, and clarity can thrive. Every action, every thought, every breath can be an exercise in building inner authority. The pause before reacting, the breath in the face of stress, the deliberate focus in distraction, the repeated choice to act with integrity, discipline, and presence. These small, conscious acts accumulate over time, rewiring the mind, shaping identity, and solidifying authority from within. The outer world becomes easier to navigate not because it has changed, but because the inner world has been mastered. The unshakable center of self radiates into every interaction, every decision, every moment. Inner authority is not given. It is earned, cultivated, and practiced. It is built in the quiet moments of self-reflection, in the disciplined repetition of choice, in the calm observation of thoughts and emotions, in the focus of energy on what matters most. It is a silent power that grows invisible but undeniable. It does not seek recognition, yet it commands respect. It does not need approval, yet it influences profoundly. It does not react to circumstance, yet it shapes every circumstance it encounters.